You're listening to Health Professional Radio with Wayne Bucklar. Today my guest is Professor Peter Howe. Peter's Professor of Nutrition Research and Director of the Clinical Nutrition Research Centre at the University of Newcastle and an adjunct professor at both the University of Adelaide and the University of South Australia. Peter, welcome to Health Professional Radio.
Thanks, Wayne.
Now, Peter, you've come on Health Professional Radio because of your research in the area of fish oil and Omega-3s, and I understand you're also speaking at the Blackmores Institute Symposium coming up shortly.
That's right, this Friday.
Lots of people seem to be very interested in that. We've had a number of speakers on the air and talking to us. Tell us about your research and what you'll be telling people about at the symposium.
Well, I've been involved in Omega-3 research since early days. When I say early days, back in the 1980s, when people used to say, he's the guy who works with snake oil. But I think we've come a long way since then in terms of recognizing the benefits of omega-3 fatty acids in fish oil as a source, and recognizing or at least understanding a bit more about the requirements for them for optimal health and some potential specific applications. So not surprisingly, there's been a marked increase in public awareness of fish oil products, and I think the latest figures show an uptake of about 12% in the Australian population, adult population, which is really remarkable when, as I said, not that many years ago, people knew very little about them and were pretty sceptical. Having said that, there's still a fair bit of scepticism out there, and a lot of that actually comes from researchers themselves who are constantly wanting to advise the public that we don't know all the answers. There's a lot more research that needs to be done, and maybe we shouldn't be jumping the gun on things like heart health benefits, etc. So there's been potentially a bit of backpedaling from the Australian National Heart Foundation. In a recently published paper, they've reviewed some of the latest evidence from clinical trials and pretty much concluded that whilst the evidence is still looking pretty good there for fish consumption, it doesn't appear to be quite so good for fish oil supplementation, which is a bit unusual because the main active component is, of course, these omega-3 fatty acids.
And I guess, Peter, given that there's no kind of drug patent or to be had in this, funding is going to be quite scarce to come by for investigating the health benefits of fish.
Well, that's how it was many years ago, and which is probably the reason why there was such a slow uptake of research into the healthful benefits of omega-3 fatty acids, even though they were recognized as potentially beneficial and pretty much essential for our diet back 40 years ago. But I guess in more recent times, now that become so much more general knowledge and understanding that fish oil supplements can deliver health benefits, there's a lot more interest. There's certainly been a huge increase in uptake and consumption of these products, and one would have hoped that that might have been accompanied by further research to better define their benefits. But one of the areas that I have been particularly concerned about is the fact that some of the studies that have been done that have raised question marks about particularly heart health benefits of omega-3s haven't been managed quite as well as I think they could have been for a nutrient that is an essential component of our diet. So that there's some omega-3s in everybody's diet. We can't actually do a proper placebo-controlled trial like a drug trial and compare a level of supplementation with total exclusion. And I think this is a flaw in a number of the more recent trials that have been done. And there's a better way of looking at this. We know, and in fact it was argued more than a decade ago, but we can look at the level of omega-3s in an individual, get a measure of an individual's omega-3 status, if you like, by measuring the omega-3 content in red blood cells, particularly looking at the combination of EPA and DHA. And this was termed the omega-3 index. It was shown not only to be a really good indicator of long-term consumption and incorporation into tissues in the body, particularly comparable to what winds up in the heart, but was also shown to be inversely related to the risk of cardiovascular disease from the trials that have been studied up until the time that was presented. Now, it was presented as a hypothesis. The evidence supporting that has continued to grow, and in fact, if you look at almost all the studies that have been done where they've actually made this measurement of the omega-3 index, then there's very clear significant association between the amount of omega-3 actually in these red blood cells, reflecting what's in the tissues in your body, and your health status. And that applies not only to heart health, but potentially also to other areas of health, including one that I'm particularly interested in, and that's mental health. And as we get older, obviously we're concerned about factors in our diet and lifestyle that can impact on our mood and cognitive performance and so on. And here we do actually have evidence also for benefits of omega-3 supplementation. And those benefits are clearer to demonstrate when you relate them to the level of omega-3s actually in the body as reflected by this measure of red blood cells. And actually one of those omega-3s, DHA, has stood out better in some studies than others. But there also appears to be quite a number of other factors that influence that, including gender differences. So these things are just coming to surface now as we start looking at this omega-3 index, or at least the levels in the red blood cells. So to me, it just seems logical that we should be undertaking these measurements and looking at those associations when we do supplementation trials. And that really would be a much better way of substantiating the sort of claims that are being made. And that also applies too to looking at the kind of omega-3s and the benefits that different supplements can deliver. For example, if you're looking at fish oil versus krill oil or some microalgal oil extract, the important thing at the end of the day is what we wind up with in our bodies after consuming these things on a regular basis.
Yes, I was intrigued by your comment that there are links with mental health and depression. This is a recurring theme we deal with here at Health Professional Radio, what appears to be a growing number of people who are suffering with mental health issues. So it seems such a simple solution. If it has a benefit, it sounds straightforward.
One of the things that got the ball rolling for omega-3s was actually the early indications that they might be very important, critical for early infant development and growth, and particularly development of brain function and retinal function. And I think looking at that end of the lifespan, right at the starting point, obviously was an important trigger to determine, whether or not the societies might have been at risk of omega-3 deficiency and therefore impairing early infant development. But now, of course, we can also be looking at the other end of the lifespan.
My guest today is Professor Peter Howe, Professor of Nutrition Research and Director of the Clinical Nutrition Research Centre at the University of Newcastle, and an adjunct professor at both the University of Adelaide and the University of South Australia. And Peter's been talking to us about his research with omega-3s. Peter, most of our audience are clinicians of one sort or another, often in acute care and aged care. Is there a takeaway message for them today as a result of having heard you on our program?
Well, I think take-home message I'd like to give is, do you know your number? You probably know what your blood pressure is. You probably know what your cholesterol, LDL cholesterol level is. Does anybody know what their omega-3 index is, and do they care? They're unlikely to know it because it hasn't been available as a routine analytical test in Australia. But it is certainly being introduced in the US and in Europe, and I think it's a very important move.
Well, so as a result of our chat today, we might inspire a few more of those clinicians to inquire a bit further about that particular test. Peter, is there a single misconception about omega-3s that concerns you? Is there a misconception amongst clients or patients or clinicians that you would like to see resolved?
Oh, only the concerns that people have as to, what's the best kind of omega-3 to be taking and, how much. And that really depends very much on why somebody is taking it, whether they're taking it for general health or whether they believe that there's some specific condition for which the omega-3s might benefit them. And then they do need to know something about type and dose. We have in our nutrient reference values for Australia and New Zealand officially adopted recommendations for omega-3s, and it amounts pretty well to a target intake of around 500 milligrams per day. And that still is the endorsed value by the Heart Foundation for the general population. But as I said, for people who are concerned about specific health conditions, they might be thinking about more than that or other types of products. I think a lot of the confusion that was out there earlier about the plant omega-3, alpha-linolenic acid, which is a precursor of the long-chain omega-3s, EPA and DHA. People did think that by eating these plant sources in bread and so on, that they were deriving the omega-3 benefit. I think that misconception has largely disappeared, and I think that's been important. So I think we need now to move forward with a better understanding of what the marine omega-3s can do for us, and recognise, that we are individuals, so it's not one size fits all. We really do need to be able to measure our omega-3 status.
Professor Peter Howe, thank you for being with us this morning. That's been a very informative chat, so I do appreciate your time. I understand you're busy. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Professor Peter Howe is Professor of Nutrition Research and Director of the Clinical Nutrition Research Centre at the University of Newcastle, and an adjunct professor at both the University of Adelaide and the University of South Australia. Peter's talking at the Blackmores Institute Symposium, which I think is coming up this week, and his topic is fish oil and omega-3s. And I understand, Peter, you'll be calling for testing and stressing the importance of fish in our diets. If you've just missed my conversation with Peter Howe, the good news is we have a transcript on our website. It's www.hbr.fm, and you can hear the interview again as a sound archive on both SoundCloud and YouTube. My name is Wayne Bucklar. This is Health Professional Radio.